For the past 7 years, I have lived almost completely furniture free, sitting, sleeping, working and eating all from the comfort of the floor. And so I've decided to put together a list of 7 things that I've learned while living this admittedly rather unusual lifestyle. But before we start, let me very briefly explain what the phrase furniture free even means. Well, for me, it's pretty simple. I live without most of the conventional furniture that you see in the average person's house. I don't have any chairs, I don't own a sofa, I sleep on the floor, and when it comes to desks and tables, I either don't use one or I use one that's the right height for me when I'm either sitting on the floor or when I'm standing. And that's basically it. I've been living this way for over 7 years at this point, and over that time I've learned how this seemingly simple-ish act can dramatically affect your life. And that started with me realising that the floor is way more comfortable than you'd expect, but probably not in the way that you'd think. I'll be honest, a hardwood floor isn't really the most appealing place to sit at first glance, especially compared to a sofa or a fancy office chair. But after 7 years of sitting on the floor, I don't really ever feel uncomfortable anymore. Sitting on the floor feels just as comfortable to me as sitting on a chair or a sofa, and I think that comes down to 2 main things. The first being that the body is very capable of adapting to different situations. And considering that sofas are not something you commonly find in nature, I think our body is perfectly capable of living without the padding that they provide. It's a bit like when you start doing any manual labour regularly. At first, your hands get sore after a couple of hours of work, but after a few weeks of working, you develop calluses, and then you can go the whole day without having any problems. Not that I have butt calluses or anything, but it's definitely toughened up over the years. The second reason is simply that there are so many more options when you sit on the floor. Cross-legged, straddle, squat, lying on your front or lying on your side, and the list goes on. And if you ever start to feel uncomfortable, you just switch positions. In fact, comfort is so rarely a problem anymore that there's only one time I can think of in the last couple of years where I've given it any thought at all. A few months ago, we switched from sleeping on our thin futon company mattress to sleeping on a duvet on the floor, which I know isn't the most sophisticated sleeping arrangement, but as a temporary measure, it's working fine for now. Anyway, the only problem that we had was that when my girlfriend woke up in the morning, she would have a sore hip from sleeping on her side. So for a couple of days, we wondered if we'd gone a step too far and whether we should go back to sleeping on the mattress. But within the week, the problem resolved itself, and now sleeping almost directly on the floor feels just as comfortable to us as sleeping on a bed. But while you might get used to being furniture free, other people definitely won't. In my opinion, there are 2 things that are actually difficult about going furniture free. The first is the transition, as in going from having furniture to not having furniture. But that's a topic for another video. So if you're interested, let me know in the comments and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss it. The other hard part of going furniture free is the social stigma. For some reason, people just can't get over the idea that you don't have furniture. As a general rule, the people of England are known for being fairly polite, but whenever I mention to someone that I don't have furniture, they give me a look that clearly states, "Oh, that's weird," followed up by asking where I sit or by telling me that they couldn't sleep on the floor because that would do their back in. In the end, this is one part of being furniture free that you just have to put up with. And unless there's a huge cultural shift that leads to more people going furniture free, I can't really see that changing anytime soon. And so I try to keep a few folding chairs and stools in the house for the people that aren't that comfortable being furniture free. Because while I can live my life however I want, I don't really expect everyone else to be comfortable sitting on the floor without practice. One of the biggest benefits that I've found with being furniture free for all this time is that I very rarely find myself struggling with anything that's related to flexibility or mobility. I'll show you what I mean. In my last furniture free video, which was about 3 years ago, I had this bit where I talked to the camera and dropped down into the splits. Since then, I have done basically 0 flexibility training. Let's see if I can still do it. Yeah, I can, pretty much. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that going furniture free will get you the splits. I've done a ton of sports and movement over the course of my life, especially climbing, which pretty much forces you to do the splits. But I've barely been climbing in the last few years and I've still got it. And not only that, I'm a pretty flexible dude in general. I can do bridge, I can do deep squat, I can put my foot behind my head, and I can get my hands flat to the floor while keeping my legs straight. Just about. And all of this without doing any regular flexibility training. Again, I can't really say that if you go furniture free, you'll be able to do all of this as well, but it will definitely help. And I think the key takeaway here is that furniture free is a great way to maintain flexibility without having to train regularly. And not only does it keep you flexible, but it'll also help you stay strong. Well, maybe strong is a bit of a powerful word in this situation. Maybe a better way to frame it would be that it stops you from becoming weak. Let me explain. How many people do you know who grunt when they get up out of a chair and can't get up off the floor without help? Well, while furniture free isn't going to give you the body of Hercules, it will stop you from becoming that grunting person as you age. As a very general rule, there are two main reasons for muscle and strength loss in adults, and they are aging and living a sedentary lifestyle. And while aging is inevitable and muscle loss is a part of that, I think that people put too much stock in the aging part and not enough in the sedentary lifestyle part. It's very easy to blame age for a loss of strength, but in physically active adults, there isn't really a significant decrease in strength until at least the age of 50. And even then, there are plenty of examples of people staying fit and healthy into their 60s, 70s, and even beyond. But then there is the other factor, living a sedentary lifestyle. Think of it a bit like a multiplier. We all decline at roughly the same rate as we age, but depending on how sedentary we are, we can slow it down or we can speed it up. If we move regularly, then we lose strength slower. And if we don't, then we lose strength quicker. And a sedentary lifestyle can very quickly turn into a downward spiral, where we don't move much, which leads to a loss of strength, which leads to us moving even less, which leads to a loss of strength, which goes on, and I think you get the picture. But that's where furniture free comes in. I get up and down off of the floor on average 40 times per day. And yes, I've counted. That's 40 squatty, lungy, push-uppy movements that I wouldn't do if I sat in a chair all day. Yeah, it might not leave you looking like Arnie, but this simple-ish lifestyle change might be the difference between you being a fit and healthy 80-year-old and not being that. The sun has decided to come out and now I am blinded. I think one of the most obvious changes that comes with living furniture free is the sheer amount of extra space that you have. At the moment, I live in a house. Not a huge one, but honestly, it's a bit more space than I need. But a few years ago, I lived in a tiny 2-room flat, and the difference being furniture free made was huge. It already felt pretty cramped with just me in it, so if I had a sofa and a table, it would have been absolutely tiny. But by living furniture free, there was enough room for my girlfriend to use it as an office, for us to exercise in there, and for us to have it as a relaxing space in the evening. Because with all that extra space comes a different way of using it. One of the things that I always notice when going to normal houses is that there's a kind of stagnant nature to them. While I admit that a room full of soft furniture can make it feel cozy, I think it can also make it feel very set in place. The furniture rarely moves, if ever, so the people always use the space in exactly the same way, usually with all the sofas pointing in the same direction at the shrine that is the television. But when there isn't a designated space for staring at screen 1, screen 2, or even screen 3, then anywhere can become a space to stare at a screen. Or, do something else, like exercising, or wandering around, pondering the next line of your script, or just having a chat. In fact, my girlfriend and I often find ourselves having chats in weird places around the house, because when there are no chairs to plonk yourself down in, anywhere and everywhere becomes a place to have a chat. And finally, I have a bit of a confession. I don't really love being furniture free. Now, to be clear, I don't hate it. In fact, I don't really think about it at all. I would call myself a climber, a gamer, and maybe even a YouTuber, but I probably wouldn't call myself a furniture free because furniture free isn't exciting. It's not sexy. In fact, it's pretty boring, but it's the best kind of boring. It's this one simple-ish change that I made to my life that came with a huge amount of health and space benefits. Without adding any more complexity to my life, I don't have to force myself to exercise more. I don't have to make any hard choices. I don't even have to go anywhere. I just live my life and reap the benefits without even thinking about it. And that's why I love furniture free, even though I don't really love furniture free. And if you want to learn more about living furniture free, then you can watch my last video about it right here, where I did a tour of my furniture free rented apartment.